Well, welcome everybody to Faith in Action, Anti-Racism, and Advocacy. We are so glad that you are here. Just a few housekeeping rules. I just said in the chat, you can ask any questions that you want to ask. You can also share resources. We have a wonderful lineup for you tonight. And I'd like to start by opening us up in prayer. So let us go to God. Gracious God, we come to you just praising you and adoring you for who you are. We come to you thanking you for your grace and for your mercy. Holy Spirit, guide us during this webinar. Help ignite a passion in us to continue to live faithfully, to seek justice, and to pursue peace. We love you, we praise you, and we adore you. And our goal, God, is to meet what you have asked of us. And that is to love you with all of our heart, soul, and mind, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. It is in the precious and mighty name of the matchless one, Jesus Christ, we pray. And everybody said, amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Well, go ahead, Rezolia.
No, go ahead, Christian.
I just want to thank Rezolia. First of all, I want to thank Rezolia for the opportunity to do this. It was her brainchild. It was her infinite wisdom that was imparted by God to hold these conversations and to gather the initial to gather the initial participants, the initial panelists, to talk our way through systemic racism, understanding it, and how we can act faithfully as believers in such a time as this. And publicly, thank you, Rezolia, for doing this and for continuing the conversation and continuing to hear the call of the community to continue these conversations and to dig deeper into each of the segments. So thank you.
Thank you. We are stronger together.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, today for today's conversation, I wanted to go through what it means to be an advocate, my personal journey, as well as those that I'm connected with. And a little bit later on in the conversation, I'll be introducing you all to the participants, several of our colleagues who are in the work on the ground in DC and here and back in Dallas. Some really good community organizing work, some good advocacy work in the places of power that has successfully moved power in the direction of progress. So in advance, I thank them for being online. I see a couple of them online already, and more to come. So, but one of the things that I definitely wanted to start out with is that this activism is a difficult work. I mean, it's hard to stay current. It's hard to stay ahead of the ball while things are moving. However, living in a racist, in a discriminatory society is a lot harder. It's a lot more oppressive. So there is a spirit of resilience that must come with it. That does come with it. Rezolia, did I lose you? I think I lost Rezolia. But one of the things that we have that the United Methodist Church has developed is a advocacy guide, a resource guide that pretty much walks us through. That pretty much walks persons through civic engagement, what it means to be civically engaged, and the biblical mandates and the United Methodist discipline mandates that go along with it, and how to use the toolkit in order to walk your way from formulating your story and owning your story of activism and what you'd work with, or what issues you work on, as well as step-by-step guides on how to visit with decision makers and planning a prayer vigil and other information as well. So I will definitely pull this back up, but wait a minute, give me a quick second. I think Rezolia has come back on. Let's see. Give us a quick second.
Hey, I'm back.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
I was just explaining to him the resource guide that the General Board of Church and Society has developed in order to help people understand what it means to be activism, or what it means to be an activist, what it means to be an advocate from the faithful perspective. And I was going to share that right quick before you and I start discussing what we've done, how we've come to this point, that kind of thing. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay. So for those who are interested, you can go to umcjustice.org and type in the search bar, Creating Change Together, and you will pull up this toolkit that we have for creating change together. It's a toolkit for faithful civic engagement. And we have a general statement from our current General Secretary of the General Board of Church and Society, Reverend Dr. Susan Henry Crow. And then within the contents of the toolkit, you'll see what it means to live our faith. As Christians, we are called to reflect God's reconciling love to all we encounter. And goes on to further explain that in detail, highlighting different persons within the Bible, within our Christian narrative, and then how has your faith inspired engagement in the society. And we have a couple of different testimonies from different Episcopal leaders and pastors. And formulating your story, how you come to know what you know, that you know, and so forth. So I would encourage anyone, United Methodist or not, to go and pick up that resource and look through it to see how best you can move from acts of charity into the actions of advocacy. So, Rezolia, you haven't got any questions? We want to talk for a little bit before we start inviting our panelists on?
Yeah, I just want to say that, okay, I'm trying to get all of this together. So one of the reasons I've been an advocate for a long time behind the scenes. So this being, out in the public and doing it is different for me. But it was, like I told you, Christian, it was one of those things that the Holy Spirit just kept saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I'm doing stuff. I came, was that in March that I came to DC and we talked to some members from Congress. So been doing the work, but God was calling me to do more and to use, the little bit of influence that I have to help educate people about what's happening in our country. It was so horrific. It was like, I have to do more. And of course, with Christians' help, I've been able to do that. So just advocacy in all forms seeks to ensure that people, particularly those who are vulnerable in society, are able to have their voice heard on issues that are important to them, to defend and safeguard their rights, to have their views and wishes genuinely considered when decisions are being made about their lives. And for so long, there have been decisions made for us. There are systems in place that keep us from living that whole and liberty and justice for all. So my work in advocacy didn't just start, but just coming to the forefront and being a leader in that. I just really want, my main goal really in life is, to give God glory for everything. And knowing that in that scripture in Matthew 22, 37, when it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbors as yourself. And then that last part where it says, and on this, you can hang all the law and the prophets. So it's kind of like, if you're not loving your neighbor, then you can hang everything else up. And I think a part of loving is trying to dismantle and deconstruct racism, which prevents that love from happening. So anything that I can do to help people understand that, and actions that we can take together, we are stronger together, actions we can take together to dismantle and deconstruct that is, what my life is dedicated to.
We all have a calling in our life. I'm glad you brought up the theological point, the theological aspect of it, because we all do have a calling over our lives to love God, to love ourselves, and to love our neighbors, I would say better than ourselves.
Right.
Because some of us have problems loving ourselves truly. However, that disdain or the contentions that we have with others are emblematic of our own selves.
Absolutely.
And how we love ourselves. But just as Isaiah said, just as the prophet Isaiah, after years of his issues and whatnot, he finally turned to God and said, "Here I am, send me."
Right.
We all have, as Reverend Dr. Zan Holmes used to say, we all have a calling to participate in our own liberation, and we see that throughout the biblical narrative. So, for me personally, I would rather be one of those persons that's working rather than letting someone else dictate where and what happens to me.
Absolutely.
And being voters, being citizens of the United States, it's incumbent upon us to be engaged on the civic level, so that our politics in holding our elected officials accountable on every level. Right. Reaching out to them, calling them, emailing them, letting them know, hey, I see that this policy is going through. I see that this piece of legislation is going through your chamber. Consider this. And there's also consider this or consider that, and there is truly power in numbers. So, as pastors, as Rezolia, as a member of the General Board of Church and Society, me being a fellow, we wield a lot of power because we're representing a lot of people.
Right.
And because of the biblical mandates that we have that are explained both in the Bible as well as in the United Methodist discipline and our social principles. We have a duty to make sure that our elected officials are working in not only in our best interest, but in the better interest of all creation.
Yes.
So, but for all the United Methodists that are on the that are in attendance right now, if you have not read the updated social principles, I urge you to go to umcjustice.org. and to look at those resources that are available. And also, there are many chances to be engaged, whether it's by the click of whether by sending an email or making a phone call. If you sign up for the alerts, for the Faith and Action alerts that General Board of Church and Society regularly publishes, emails, you will get those ways to instantly send emails to elected officials, get phone numbers or scripts to be engaged on the federal level. And also there's some information there that could work on your local level as well. Rezolia, did you have anything else?
No, I'm ready.
You ready?
I'm ready for this lineup, yes.
All right. Well, without further ado, just want to go down the line here and invite Reverend Jeannie Moore. She's one of my colleagues here with the General Board of Church and Society. She is the Director of Civil and Human Rights, and she is a powerhouse unto herself. I hate the fact that she's going to be leaving General Board of Church and Society to go to pursue her PhD at Yale, but I know that she is going to move on to do some great and magnanimous things in the kingdom. So without further ado, Jeannie.
Hi, Christian and Rezolia. First, thank you so much for inviting me to join you this evening, and just big thanks and gratitude to you for leading this discussion series. There's no time like the present for this work, for this conversation, and I feel like that's something I've been saying as long as I've been at GBCS, so the past 4 years, which have been pretty intense, but I think it's a statement that holds true for this work of advocacy. So thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and what you're charged to do within the office and what kind of activities you're engaged in currently.
Sure. So as Christian mentioned, I am his colleague at the General Board of Church and Society here in Washington, D.C. I should also note that there's a pretty intense thunderstorm happening right now Christian, I don't know if you heard that clap of thunder maybe
Yeah,
2 minutes
kind of
ago,
scared me.
but it was like right above right above Capitol Hill. So just in case there's any background noise or I cut out, you know, prayerfully it'll be fine. But at GBCS, yes, we are on Capitol Hill in the United Methodist building, and we are the advocacy agency of the United Methodist Church that is tasked with helping our church live into its social statements and proclamations, right? As Christians, we believe a lot of things about what is just, what is unjust, and the way that the world should be, that often contrasts with the way that it is. And so our work as an agency is to help the church really live into the vision that God has and that we share as children of God for the world on a host of social issues. My portfolio is the Civil and Human Rights portfolio, which contains immigration, criminal justice reform, gun violence prevention, religious liberty, I mentioned immigration, refugees and global migration. What else? There's a lot that kind of gets thrown in. We work as staff together on issues, so it's not like there are discrete, you know, lines of separation between us as a staff or even between the issues, right? Because immigration, that right there involves women and children, right? You think of the media attention over the past couple of years started really burgeoning 2 summers ago on detained children and family separation, something that has been going on, has continued to go on and had been going on for some time. Families are still apart, children are still without their parents. So you can see how the issues kind of bleed in. I mentioned immigration just now. That's an issue of racial justice, right? We look in those cages, those are Black and brown bodies. And that's very clear, right? I think it would be something quite different if, I mean, the president himself, right, acknowledged that if immigrants were coming from places like Sweden or European countries, he would have a whole different outlook, and the government would reflect that as well. So that's a little bit of an overview. Christian, tell me if you have any other questions about, and Rezolia, since I don't know that we've spoken.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what are some of the current initiatives that you're working on right now?
So right now, COVID funding, right, is a big thing ongoing, just the same way that the pandemic is developing and continuing, you know, to plague families, localities, communities, cities, states, countries. The government response is continuing. And so funding packages addressing the pandemic are still being put together, and we are advocating on a host of the issues that I mentioned. We're being attentive to those legislative packages, those legislative solutions that are being proposed. So earlier today, actually, I was having a conversation with other faith-based gun violence prevention advocates about what our advocacy is going to look like in this time. Gun violence continues unabated, very sadly, in the United States. And so the need for our advocacy is still here. However, you know, for some folks in the movement, their consciousness around racism has been awakened in the past month or so, and they're realizing that, hey, maybe we shouldn't call for more funding for government agencies that could trickle down to policing. You know, that might not be the best way to go about preventing arms trafficking or you know, other issues of serious concern on gun violence prevention. So that's an example of how the funding topic connects to all of these other things that I work on. Another example is voting rights, right? We know that systemic racism in the United States is, policing is a part of it, it's not all of it. It's also water policy, right? Flint, Michigan. It's also voting. And that's something we see historically and in a way that I find quite scary, you know, presently. The efforts and initiatives and passage of voter suppression is a very real and present and current danger. And so, you know, one thing that coalitions in our community are working on right now is support for, or calling on our members of Congress to support the HEROES Act, and specifically the election provisions. So this is a piece of legislation, and part of what it does is provide, I think, $3.6 billion in funding, as well as certain voting rights guardrails to prepare for the November 2020 election. I mean, we've already seen, right, elections in the past couple of months in the midst of the pandemic where, you know, the courts were going one way, the politicians were going another, people still had to vote and, you know, decide between risking their lives or casting their vote. And, you know, unfortunately, politicians can be pretty unscrupulous, and so try to take advantage of the confusion and the fear and count on certain communities not getting access by closing polls, you know, that serve largely Black and Brown and poor communities. And so that's maybe a small taste of the number of things. Yeah,
I always have such a ton. So just about the voting, something tangible, because this is anti-racism and advocacy. So for some of the people listening, what is something tangible that they can do to advocate for voters' rights or helping people get to voting? What are a few tangible things that they could do?
Thank you for asking that. Tangibles are always great. And I'm going to take a page out of Christian's book and direct people to our website, www.umcjustice.org. You'll find at the top an action that you can take. And the action is let me pull it up actually right now myself and look at it. It explains the issue and the need for, you know, advocates like us to rise up and call on our members of Congress to support free, fair, and safe elections. And what you're able to do is enter your information and send a message to your members of Congress. I would encourage you to follow that up with a phone call. If you don't, thanks, Christian. It looks like Christian just posted it in the chat. Great. And right, to follow up the letter or the email with a phone call, if you don't have the congressional switchboard in your phone as a contact, I encourage you to make it one, so that'll make it easy. And that's something you can do right now. And I will, after I pull it up, I can type that in the chat as well so that people can go ahead and make that contact and call them every day. And in addition to that kind of large scale, you know, federal level funding, I think calling your local officials, so your mayor, you know, county officials and others, and inquiring, you know, what preparations are being made? What funding do you have? What funding do you need? What steps are you taking to ensure that people in our community can fully exercise their right to vote? So there's some tangible things.
Like I said before, I was there in March. Can you tell me a little bit about the significance of where the United Methodist building is located in DC?
Absolutely.
And is it not older than the Supreme Court building?
It is.
Okay.
Yes. Tell
me about that.
Yeah, there's a great aerial photo that we have from the early 1920s of Capitol Hill, and the United Methodist building is there, and the Supreme Court is not, because the Supreme Court used to have its office in a different part of the Capitol. It was not that building, which is beautiful, the Supreme Court, which is marble and white and, you know, very classical and imposing looking, hasn't always been there. So Yes, the United Methodist Building, I believe, was founded in 1923 or established in that location in 1923. It is the only non-governmental plot of land on Capitol Hill. So everything else is the government and really the seat of government. We're right across from the Capitol building. We're directly across from the Senate and just up the street from all the House buildings. So, and as you mentioned, right next to the Supreme Court as well, adjacent to the Supreme Court. So that landscape, I think, is a really good reflection of how the United Methodist Church historically and continuing sees itself as well as the role of faith more broadly. Because our building, the United Methodist Building, it's not just an office building for us and other United Methodist agencies, including the General Commission on Religion and Race, GCOR, United Methodist Women also had an office, may still have an office in our building. But aside from the United Methodist Church, there are offices for the Episcopal Church, for the Presbyterian Church, for Islamic Society of North America. It's really an interfaith space. And I think that is truly reflective of, you know, how the United Methodist Church understands the role of people of faith and goodwill. We are to engage. We are to be active citizens. We are to, as Christian was saying, you know, love our neighbors, and civic engagement is a major way that we do that.
And one of the things that I appreciated about my tour of the building when I first got here was that Clayton Childers, he said that the United Methodist Building was established to keep a watchful eye on America's democracy. So that's always stuck with me. And you know, for this space to be an ecumenical or a interfaith space, it means the world to be here. It means it means a lot to be able to work in this space and also be able to be connected to this space. And I'm grateful that the United Methodist Church has definitely held on to it, and it is a place for where a lot of good things have happened and will happen. So yeah.
Yeah.
Would you share a little bit, Christian, about what happened on, was it yesterday? What the, you know, if both of you all could share a little bit about your experience of being there and how, you know, there's so many protests that happen like right there, literally like almost every day. So can you all share a little bit about your experience in being that close to, you know, the hub of so many political protests?
Oh, yeah. Jean, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Christian.
Oh.
I'd love to hear what you have to say too, because you're newer than I am. You know, this is all still fresh.
Yeah. Well, when I first moved here in September for this fellowship, I didn't realize how close in proximity everything was going to be. And to know and to have pulled up in front of the building, in front of the United Methodist Building, to see the Capitol building right across the street and the Supreme Court building literally next door. That blew my mind. And John Hill, one of the Assistant General Secretaries of GBCS, said that there comes a time in most people's DC life that the glimmer, the shimmer, the excitement of DC wears off. And it's that point in time in which that is time to move on. I certainly have not lost that. have not lost that. Even though I'm living in the United Methodist Building in the apartment side of the building, during the fall, I kept my windows open just to get fresh air in the building, in my apartment building, that kind of thing. And like clockwork, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 6:30, I'd hear the protesters outside in front of the Supreme Court getting ready or like vocally voicing their concerns and their positions, you know, in front of the Supreme Court. And there has not been a day that has passed where there's not been some kind of activity out there. It's honest, I geek out. So yeah, it's been a good experience. but I will share yesterday. I think this is where Rezolia was trying to get me to go. Yesterday there was a gathering of Black Lives Matter, a gathering of people. Like it was an intercultural group of people that were standing outside of the Supreme Court on the 4th of July, having pretty much having a cookout. They had the music going. They had a couple of grills going. Food was being given away for free. People just enjoying, the day on Capitol Hill. And there was a caravan of motorcyclists and trucks that drove by that were waving the American flag and the "Don't Tread on Me" flag and the Blue Lives Matter flags, and they were flipping off and calling the participants of the gathering the N-word, and other things. Later, come to find out, they had done 2 rounds past the Supreme Court. But I was talking with one of the Capitol Hill police officers that guards the Supreme Court, and they said that Metropolitan Police had actually pulled those people over and given them tickets and done some other things that he couldn't go into or what have you. So it's good to know that out of all the policing agencies that have jurisdiction over DC, they were able to squash or to contain that bit of racism. And it's quite honestly, it's emblematic of the condition of our country, right? There's an us versus them mentality that's happening. There's a history of racism that has infected our country since before its founding. And I can't help but to look to the resiliency of the ones who are willing to stand their ground, continue cooking, continue celebrating, continue living, and continue moving in the way of justice and calling others into the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to comment on your? She's like, no, I'm good.
No, I think I would just add that Christian did a great job explaining the excitement, also the reality of where we are. Advocacy, attending protests, organizing protests, press conferences, all of that is our day in, day out work. And when something becomes your work, it is what you do. However, things like what Christian just shared about, negative protests or counter protests, as well as, sometimes protests that take you by surprise or demonstrations that are really unique or stop you in your tracks, those continue to happen. And I think it's so important because it engages those of us who are in the movement, not just as those who are constructing it, but as people who ourselves need to be engaged and touched, and I'm grateful that continues to happen for Christian. That does continue to happen for me too.
What drew you to the work?
So I got involved in an anti-death penalty situation when I was in seminary in Georgia. There was a woman on death row, and I had interned at the prison where she was incarcerated as a seminary chaplain intern. And in my first year and then my third year, she was an execution date was set for her. And kind of out of that connection, I didn't know her well, but I did know the women who were at the prison with her better. I had also taught a course in the Teaching Theology in Prison program and volunteered in other ways. And so I just kind of felt a pull to stand up and say, this is wrong, this is outrageous. And I, again, had my own eyes open, even though I opposed the death penalty in theory for quite some time before that happened. This was the first time I was opposing it in action, and that changes you. And so that experience, which is now 5 years ago, drew me to this world of activism, advocacy, and civic engagement more fully. I'd been interested in it long before, but
Right.
yeah. So thank you.
to move from the a prison chaplain, a jail chaplain, to into the realm of advocacy. That's a big jump.
There were some steps in between, but yeah, I guess in the span of 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to hold you on the Zoom for too much longer, but I want to also point out to you, or I also want to congratulate your recent ordination as a deacon within the, which conference are you in?
California Pacific Conference.
Gotcha.
Here, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And on your move to Yale.
Yes. Moving during a pandemic will be interesting. But thank you. I am so grateful for the kind of greater community of those who are witnessing and advocating, that I know I'm leaving this community in hands. Did I freeze?
Just a little bit.
A little bit.
Okay. Well, that's all right. I was just saying, even though I'm leaving, I know I'll be in good hands.
Yes, indeed. Well, Jean Marie, thank you very much for coming, talking with us and sharing with us about your work. And yeah, I will see you tomorrow morning during staff meeting.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, shall we go to the next person on the list, Rezolia?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, without further ado, I have one of the Washington Interfaith staff community members here in Washington, D.C., who will be joining us. Her name is Laura Sartre Schulte with the Network Lobby. She is a senior government relations advocate, and she has done some remarkable things, and she's an incredibly knowledgeable woman. Every time I am in a meeting with her, just the wealth of knowledge that just comes up. It's just like, do you have any brain room for anything else? And lo and behold, she does. So
it's a matter of being a little older. Been around way too long. Thank you, Christian.
Well, welcome to the conversation. This is Rezolia Johnson that we're here, as well as if you want to go ahead and greet everyone and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is, again, Laura Peralta Schulte, and I'm with Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. And Network has been in existence from the early 1970s. There was a change in the Catholic tradition in the 60s. And so we were actually founded by Catholic sisters who were moving out of more cloistered lives and always doing the work in schools and in providing services or working with folks in poverty. But they really decided, like, if we are going to make a change, we need a structural change to really change the laws. So we were set up in the 70s, and I am not a Catholic sister. I say I work for Catholic sisters. And so, we have a portfolio that is called Mend the Gaps. We do a lot of work on economic justice. So that includes everything from healthcare to tax policy. It's nerdy, but it's actually one of my favorite issues. We do criminal justice work. We do a lot of immigration work. Many of the issues that Janie Reed was talking about, democracy, voting rights, are all issues that we work in community with to try to make some progress.
Gotcha. Well, the one question I do want to start out with is that, what does it mean to be an ally in this anti-racism movement that we're seeing developing even more so in past years?
I just want to affirm, Christian sent me the earlier presentations that you did. And Christian, I just have to say that as a white woman who has been engaged from an organizational standpoint, I think we've been trying to work for the last 5 years very intentionally around becoming an anti-racist organization. But as is so clear from the conversations that you've had, and that I've just appreciated listening, and just from the work and what's happening in our society, you know, there's just things that I like you used the pool analogy or the fishbowl analogy last week, in terms of the idea that it's the water we swim in. So half of the time I feel like I'm just learning, frankly, and trying to be as good an ally as possible. You know, for me, the grounding, and I'm so glad you raised Matthew, because it is always something I think about, you know, what does it mean as a person of faith to be with people who are impacted by unjust policies? So I think what I'm learning, I'm an extrovert, so it's always a challenge, but what I'm learning is to talk less, listen more, and to show up. You know, I've always tried to do that, but again, the intentionality for me has been, the study has brought me to a different phase, praise God, and hopefully that will continue.
Rezolia, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so Network Lobby, can you tell our listeners more about what that is and what you do, what kind of initiatives are taking place? And
okay.
And also, why, let me ask you this first. Why do you feel like it's not an anti-racist organization? Let's start with
that. We will start there because that is where we have to start. I am not sure how much your listeners are aware of the history of the Catholic Church. It is not unlike the history of so many Christian traditions in the United States that has been grounded in both a theological standpoint and in a lived reality of deep structural racism. You know, there are some work that's going on right now in some congregations, sisters congregations, in some orders, to really take a look at that history. It was embedded in the structure and in the theology, and it's a painful history that there are a couple of theologians in our tradition that really point out that if we don't get that right, that piece, the church piece right, then we can't show up justly in the broader movement. And I think that's absolutely right. You know, from churches and structures owning, enslaving people, to the genocidal tendencies of the missionaries. I'm thinking of Father Juniper Serra and others out on the I'm Californian, so that is a very real tradition and history to me. You know, to literally having segregated churches. I go to a church in Arlington, Virginia, that was founded as a Black church. Why? Because, you know, Virginia was segregated and the Catholic Church was segregated. And that was a church founded really outside the mainstream of the tradition to minister to 5 very faithful Black families that wanted to own the tradition. And so that's it. But we've had all kinds of discussions where, you know, and I was just learning, people who grew up and they couldn't get communion at the rail. You know, and that's beyond sinful.
Right. Well, is the term anti-racist something that is new for you in this climate? And if so, tell me a little bit about how you came to accept, embrace, and acknowledge that term.
So my personal evolution has coincided with the organizational one, and there is a deep sense of gratitude that I will always have for many of my younger colleagues who we have a program where we bring young students in for a year and train them in advocacy in different aspects of it, and I will just say and I'm an old history teacher, which is even worse because there was so much that was unknown to me and had I been teaching, it would have been seriously different. But they started asking questions about our structure about 6 years ago when I was first getting there. And it was really, I have a colleague who had been much more studied and done some deep work in it. So between the younger people and my colleague, she shepherded a process where we created a racial justice circle and started to have very intentional readings and very intentional work. We have made a lot of mistakes. I just want to own that because, for example, we read white privilege, which privilege is a white voice in the middle of a multi-ethnic organization. I often feel so sorry for my colleagues of color because how painful it is to become aware of people that you love and that you work with, just their blindness. And so it has not been easy. It is one of the most faithful things I think we are doing. But I feel like there's a sacredness to the discussion, and there's a deep humility that and again, less is more, I think, coming out of me. I have to own that I make a lot of mistakes, that I need to continually learn. Thank God I have teenagers, because they are actually, they send me all kinds of things all day long to try to get their mother straight. So between the work and my family and the broader community that Christian is a part of, it has been a blessing.
Before we get in, thank you for your candor. Appreciate you, Laura, for that candid response. Before we get into the actual the meat and potatoes of the work that you do and what the WISC community is and DHE and activities and that kind of thing, before we move on to our next participant a little bit, since we have a Catholic insider, well, a non-Catholic insider, I'd have to ask this question: have there been talks within the Catholic community of opening the Vatican archives and talking about the history of the church's complicitness and work in actually constructing racism?
So Christian, let me give you a little bit of history on Network. So we are found, so racism and sexism are deeply embedded in the structure of the church. So as you, since we were founded by nuns who are considered lay people in the tradition, we often refer to ourselves as the stomach acid of the Catholic Church. So we kind of play an outsider role, calling our church structures to live into justice. So that is a very real reality. So I don't work for the U.S. bishops. I work with them all the time and try to encourage them to take certain actions. From our perspective, the more that our history is looked at, the more deeply we can heal. We are a nation and a church that needs to heal. And so I think if you were talking to our sisters or our folks, the idea of opening up the Vatican and owning the role of the church in colonization and in subjugation of people and deaths, and that we would be all for it. I think where we are leaning into as an organization is more to try to push our bishops into a deeper conversation about racial justice in the United States. And, we have been pleased that the Jesuits are starting to look at some of their schools and, owning their history. Catholic sisters need to do the very same thing, because sisters have a very deep history of racism and exclusion of Black Catholic sisters. So the work is real. I think a lot of us are definitely for it, but again, we are not the institution.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. I had to throw you a curveball there.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us about the legislative, about the current work that you're doing, like what you're doing within WISC, and explain what that is, and also how others can be engaged with you in that work?
Sure. So, and I'm so glad that our colleague Jeannie Ray was just on in terms of talking about democracy and other issues, because everybody right now is focused on the only train that's going down the tracks, and that is, what is happening in COVID. What we know is that the Senate is beginning to work on the next package. I was talking to some Hill staff today on the Republican side who are still telling us that they are looking to finalize the next package by the first week of August. So for anybody listening, what that means in Washington talk is, we have 4 weeks to make sure that the good pieces or good piece of legislation that we got in the HEROES Act move forward. So that is the voting piece, some of the healthcare pieces. I tell you where my work, Christian, has been most intense lately, because it is really where maybe some of the, there are not as many folks working the issue in our community as in maybe some of the other issues, is the economic justice piece. And we know that people, there's an astronomically high unemployment rate right now, particularly in communities of color. We know that even if you haven't lost your jobs, there's so many people whose hours have been reduced, wages have been cut. And as folks want to say, is they need cash. They need cash and they need relief now, not later. So there is a proposal that we are working on, both with Democrats and Republicans, to try to make sure that there's a second cash payment. If we could have them going on until the end of the pandemic or until recovery, that would be great. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. But we want to make sure that there is another round of cash payments. We want to make sure that the exclusion that was put in the last bill, the CARES Act, that cut out our immigrant sisters and brothers, is fixed. So that if you are in need, people generally get access to it, and brown immigrant families are not excluded. The longer term piece that we're really working hard on is, we know the recovery is going to take a long while. Best reports coming out of all the economic indicators is that even at the end of 2021, we're likely to see extremely high unemployment rates. So what we are trying to do against structural change is we are trying to get in this package change to 2 tax credits, the child tax credit and the earning of tax credit. Unbelievably, where so many of the wealthy, if you want to have a racial frame on it, wealthy white inherited money complains about their taxes that they do not pay. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got millions of people who are literally taxed into poverty every year. Taxed into poverty every year. So we're trying to make sure that in this country, nobody is taxed into poverty. That disproportionately helps folks that are struggling at the bottom. And we have a provision that was in HEROES that will reduce child poverty by 50%. It's expansion of the child tax credit so that it is fully refundable. That disproportionately impacts low-wage workers. It disproportionately impacts Black and brown families because of the exclusions that they've had in the economy. And so again, we're looking for structural changes. So those are between the cash payments for now and the refundable credits for taking effect next year. We think those are the kinds of changes that will be game changers.
Well,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I'm like, we can't just accept the charitable solutions for structural problems.
Amen. 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 So can I do a confession? So I come from the other side. My road to advocacy has been a long one. I started on the commercial side, working for a big company, very attracted to the power and the gamesmanship of DC, because it is intoxicating. And I know fully well, and that's why we are working so hard on it. The other side puts so much money behind the process to get exclusions for really wealthy people. And so, you know, that is a structural problem as equal to the structural problem on the other end, which is there's barely a consideration for people who are struggling. So it's really a two-pronged structural problem. We got to make sure people who are wealthy are actually paying taxes, and we've got to modify the you know, to make sure people are lifted out of poverty.
So is
I'm sorry, I had to give a confession.
I'm grateful for that. I mean, I've seen a lot of people actually move from the corporate lobbying to advocacy because they realize just the sinfulness and the money that goes through lobbying, you know, for corporate interests. And now that Citizens United is on the books, you know, we have businesses that are labeled people, you know, on the same level, and they are getting more of a preference than actually we the people. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, when Amazon is not paying taxes or Netflix, there is a problem.
Yeah, especially, yeah.
Say no more.
We can have a conversation on that for 2 hours just on the side.
Yes.
So Laura, is there any way that people can get connected with, any way for our viewers to get personally connected with you or see or to be engaged with the work that you all are doing?
Sure. And we're really all together. So why don't I'm going to listen to your conversation because it's a holy conversation, and I'm so glad to be having the chance to just listen in. What I'll do is let me look through some of my materials and see if I can't put something into the chat box.
Okay.
There will be action, Twitter storms, and ways to reach out to the right folks. I gotta say, the Methodist, your church has a number of folks that are on the key committees, lo and behold. And I know you're from Texas, Christian, and Mr. Cornyn sits on the most important committee and can make this happen. So to your Texas friends, you know, contact about being faithful is really strategic.
Yeah, most definitely.
Mr. Cornyn probably knows Christian by now.
I know some of the staffers do.
Visits, calls, staff member, yes.
Christian has been a gift to our community and is very modest when he is saying, you know, that he's participating in these groups. He's been active, and there is not a time where we're in a meeting where he doesn't say something profound and his gift. So.
Amen. We have a question in the chat room. What is being done to make sure that the payments are being received by all people? And you may or may not know.
No, that's been a big issue because it is an issue that the government is kind of making up as it goes along. So what you should know is the IRS really hired an outside firm to help them get those checks out the door as quickly as possible. But the assumptions that upper middle class folks make is that everybody has a bank and that and everybody has an address. So there has been a lot of intentionality as we looked for hopefully a second payment, and the president has said that he too would like a second payment, to make sure that everybody gets access. So they're looking at using potentially SNAP, the way that SNAP benefits are given out through debit cards as a possibility. There is a lot of intentionality. I'm not working on that. We're just trying to convince members of Congress to make sure people get a second round of cash payments and maybe make sure people are not taxed into poverty. But that is being looked at. And again, I can look for something to put in the chat.
Thank you.
Well, well, Laura, we thank you for your time, and
Thank you.
thank you for the gracious affirmation of the work that I do. Sometimes I talk and don't even remember what I say, so thank you.
Well, I do. So thank you. And thank you both for this conversation. It was it's good learning coming in, and I look forward to following you in your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Rezolia. Well, let's see. Uh-oh.
Who do we have up next, Christian?
Let's see. I think
It's Reverend Robinson.
yeah, we have. I think I actually just took Laura out of the conversation altogether. So hopefully she'll be able to log back in. But now we have Reverend Edwin Robinson of the Dallas Black Clergy. I'm going to pull him into the conversation here. He's been an advocate and been a force in my personal life as it pertains to activism in Dallas and even here in DC. So here he is right here, the man with many plans.
Hello, Reverend Robinson.
How y'all doing, family?
Doing well. How about you? What's going on?
Oh man, you know, I'm just being black in America, man. So I'm trying to just stay alive. And keep a smile on my face. That's all we got, right?
That's all we got. We keep on kicking and keep on doing what you're doing.
Tell us about what that is. What are you? What do you have going on, Reverend Robinson?
Oh, doing so much, but I think in particular, you know, we started a civil rights organization, which is pretty dope. Black-led, Black-centered. Just been kicking it with these, you know, 9 other really cool Black pastors in Dallas, and we decided that we just wanted to be pastors everywhere instead of just being pastors inside the 4 walls of our church. And so we got busy kicking it with each other about 2 years ago, and you know, we just help amplify what's happening in the ecosystem, you know, and I think that's what pastors are supposed to do. Use our power when we can, and use our influence. And when people listen to us, it's good because usually it helps the people. So that's what we're up to.
Where are you? Are you a pastor in Dallas?
No, well, I'm in Dallas, but I'm not a pastor, like of a church or anything like that any longer.
The world is your parish.
You know, look, I can't say that because, you know, people got to choose their pastor, so I ain't gonna force myself on people. But no, I spent some time, you know, as a staff pastor at Concord Church in Dallas, as the young adult and singles pastor. My roots are in the church. I've been a youth pastor. I've been in the church, you know, ever since, you know, I was born in the church all the way from the womb. And so it's my life, you know, and I just decided, you know, with all my even frustrations, I decided I wasn't going to cede ground and abdicate, you know, the church to people who want to make it something else. So I'm here, so the church gonna have to deal with me too.
What drew you into the work of action and advocacy? Was there a particular event, or what drew you into the advocate part and coming up with this brilliant plan of, you know, starting this movement?
Yeah, that's that's a big question. Look, the plan, it just happened. There was no plan, right? It was kind of like we were doing our thing, and we kind of looked up. We kept saying we're not an organization, and then we were kind of like, we're kind of an organization. So we might want to figure that out. So that's how Dallas Black Clergy really just became an organization. Getting into this work, I don't know, you know, I wish I had like a really cool story, but I don't. I think the reality is I was just called to it. I can't remember a time when I didn't care. And so, you know, my life trajectory just got me here.
What are some of the initiatives that you all are working on as the Dallas Black Clergy?
Yeah, right now, we're very, very interested in economic justice, right, as true anti-racism, right? You know, and so that's a big push of ours, and I think a lot of our work is wrapped around that. You know, we also, you know, we try to help and push and amplify on other policies that we know will kind of move, you know, some of the other pieces on the board, because this is chess. But our real heart is economic justice and economic equity for Black people in America.
And how can, is there a way that white people can help with what you all are trying to do?
Yeah, give us money.
In what form? So like how
Money.
just where would they send it? Just
Oh, you can go to DallasBlackClergy.com, right? And there's a donate page, Cash App. So, you know, money sign, Dallas Black Clergy. I'm serious. That's how white people can help us. The end. Money. The reality, right? Like, there's no magic thing to this, right? I'm in San Francisco right now, right? And our Asian sisters and brothers who are here are doing quite well and have been doing quite well because they got reparations after Pearl Harbor. So the simple answer is money. Give us money. Thank you.
Go ahead.
As far as the greater scheme of things, as far as activism, your work in Dallas, that kind of thing, how does that money, or how does the lack of funds compare to like people who want to be involved in your work, but want to be involved physically? How does that financial contribution actually help, as opposed to their physical presence?
Yeah, well, the truth is, like I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna just be direct. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but we don't actually need their presence, and that's not because their presence is not welcomed or we don't care. Has nothing to do with that, right? We just don't need it, right? It's not helpful. What we need is their money, because we have plans. We're smart. We got all the stuff. We're organized. So we don't need any extra things. The capitalism exists, and so until capitalism stops existing, it costs money to buy things. The end. If we don't have any money, then we just got a bunch of plans sitting on the shelf. So you coming does not help me. It just gives me another person I got to deal with. I need money.
So what plans do you have for the money that you all have now, or what plans do you all already have that's rolling, that people can sign on to, that people can support or repost on social media, or take to their elected officials that can help move the conversation in Dallas?
Well, I'll say in Dallas in particular, and this is not just Dallas Black Clergy, this is the ecosystem. And so we're going to amplify this, all the organizations, Mothers Against Police Brutality, In Defense of Black Lives Dallas, so many other groups. I'm going to blank. I started calling names, and you know how that goes. But look, there's so many organizations in Dallas, and right now we've all agreed on these 10 new directions for safety and justice. And we're pushing for to defund the police in Dallas and refund the people, right? At the end of the day, it's still the same. Like, we can pass all the policies we want, but if there's no money, it's just like kicking the slaves off the plantation. And then what do, right? We ain't got no money. You worked this for years. Now we can't function in your education system. You won't let us vote. We can't get a job, and we just supposed to make it, right? So this is the point, right? We need another reconstruction in America. And sincerely, if white people really want to help, and I'm dead serious, I'm not saying not do no anti-racism trainings and all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying none of that. But I'm saying, if you about to drop a couple grand on a consultant to come and teach you some history, you should make that same contribution, if not double that, into Black organizations that are moving policy. Because at the end of the day, anti-racism training is simply, anti-racism work is policies and systems. So that's that.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. We have a question in the group, in the chat here on Zoom, that can you briefly explain what defunding the police looks like, or what that movement is?
Yeah, it's defunding the police. It's taking money away from the policing budget and putting it into all of the other budgets that need money. It's just that simple. It's not, and I say it that simply because sometimes, our American language, right? Like we create complexity, and this is not to this person, this is just all of us. We create complexity where there is none, right? This is a very simple ask. If we're spending the great deal of our tax dollars on policing, then that means that we are a police state. That means we are a military country, right? The former Soviet Union, right? Their second in command was the Minister of Defense, right? That's why, because they spent the most money on defense. If that's what we're doing, then that's what we are. So what we're simply saying is we don't want to be that. You shouldn't want to be that either, because that makes nobody safe. Ask Russia. So We want to move money away from policing budgets. Policing budgets should be dropped way down. We can move money into things that are proven to raise the economic status of everybody in the community, which automatically lowers crime. Police won't have time to respond to dumb Karen calls because they'll be dealing with real crime because there won't be as many of them, right? And so that's really what it is.
I think Martin Luther King stated the three of the worst systemic issues in our country were poverty, racism, and then militarism. So speaks to what you're talking about with the militarism. So
absolutely. And look, capitalism exists because we all like it, right? So let's just all, you know, if you didn't like capitalism, you'd be off the grid. The people who really don't like capitalism don't do capitalism, right? The rest of us like it. So as long as it exists, then it's simple. Wherever we're spending the most money is where our priorities are. And in a city like Dallas, where we got 60% of our budget on public safety, which something like 60% of that 60% is policing, and we got like 10% of our budget going to things like community centers, libraries, public, all that sort of stuff. Well, then we've already decided where we want to put where we put our intention. So it doesn't matter how many nonprofits we have. It doesn't matter how many good words and how many plans and how many cool things any of our politicians say or anybody tries to put forward, until we actually move money away from the policing budget and put it into the things that we know create public safety, then this is going to be a fight, you know, because it's for the people. And it's for the people. And that's what Jesus would do.
It kind of reminds me of the scripture, Matthew 6:1 is where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be too. And this is a matter of the heart. You know, it's a matter of the heart. The love that people have for each other goes back to the Matthew passage that we talked about earlier, loving God with everything you are, loving others, neighbors as yourself. It's a matter of the heart. And where your treasure is, where's the money?
That's it. That's it.
So,
and I would say the same thing as we're going to elections in your local cities. Yo, you need to be asking your politicians what's their budgets, because no matter what they tell you, it doesn't matter. Where they're spending their money is where their priorities are, period. So they can say whatever they want, but if ain't no money for it, it don't matter.
Break it down for us, Pastor. So what's on the horizon for Dallas Black Clergy? What are y'all looking to move into? What's the next thing?
I don't know if there's a next, man. It's just a continue, I guess I would say. You know, our website, we have a 2020 agenda that we been working on for the last 2 years. We've actually almost accomplished it. That's prophetic. You know, actually, I actually need to update it because, you know, the monuments have come down. So, you know, that's one of the things. I think there's only one more thing on that agenda, and that is a living wage for everyone. And we're probably not going to get that in 2020. Won't get that to the legislative session. But then we also have a 2024 agenda on there. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but if you go to the website, we've just said, we're going to ensure that our people get what they need to survive, and Black people get what they need to survive, because somebody got to look out for us.
So one last question. How important is it for people to go and participate with City Hall's meetings and to link up with their elected officials and to constantly hold them accountable?
Yeah, it's vitally important, right? You know, all politics is local, and that's not something you should say in passing. Like, people really need to preach that as like, you should get that tattooed on your body, right? Like, the truth, all politics is local, right? It really is. And that is not to say we shouldn't vote in our other elections, but how you vote in your federal election should be only a reflection of how you're voting in your city council or you know, whatever your local government is. It should be a direct reflection of that. And so it's just that important. It affects everything you do every day. I never say this to my friends, but I realize, like, I'm on phone calls. It's not to say anything of me. It's just to say how important it is to be in relationship with your public officials. and you don't real like you're having conversations with people and you don't realize that these conversations are literally affecting everything that everybody in the city is about to do. And it's really just a conversation, or it's just having prayer, you know, with a public official, or, you know, talking to them about their family and helping them through a situation, you know what I mean, as a pastor. And so that's how it's just that vitally important, you know.
I have one more question, just a little pushback on, I have this mantra that we're stronger together, this philosophy, the South African philosophy of Ubuntu, and how collectively we can make more of a difference. So I'm wondering, do you not feel that there is power in the presence of white people and their privilege in some cases?
Oh, I didn't say there's not power. I just said it's not necessary. Right? So it's not that, yeah, it's not that there's not power there, right? And so I think that's the other thing, right? It's not necessary. Like, the truth is, I know I can, like, people, there are enough plans across the country written by Black people, centered in Black people, that if funded, we could change everything. Simply that. That is not to say that there wasn't a time where it was more helpful, right? That is to say, right now, today, if you're asking me, is it necessary? The answer is no, it's not necessary, but it's helpful. So don't stop. But we need money. If you want to know how you can really help us right now,
from my point of view,
today,
money.
I don't even think it's my point of view. It is my point of view, but no, this is history. This isn't perspectival. And I don't want to limit it there, right? It's a very American thing to do, right? I don't want to make it perspectival. I think it's just the history says it. We're at this point in the movement where if we don't have significant investment in the political action committees that we've started, if we don't have significant investment in Black banks, if we don't have significant investment in HBCUs, if we don't have significant investment in Black civil rights organizations, if we don't have significant investment in Black schools, like, we'll get all the policy, but then the white people will be like, see, we're done, and then we'll be broke. And so we won't be able to put anything into place. And so if we can't get the policy first and have no money, because then we'll be begging them for the money.
Right.
You see, that it's a power dynamic shift.
Right.
And that's really what I'm saying. If you want to help us right now, we need money, because capitalism exists, and that's what's going to make us actually equal in the eyes of capitalism, because that exists.
All right. Break it down.
Well, I mean, after all that, I don't think I have any more questions. Rezolia, do you have any others? I
do not.
All right, bro. Well, Edwin, one last plug. What's your final comment? What's the coup de grace on everything that you just offered to our viewers? What's a piece of motivation, inspiration, however you want to end your conversation with us?
Yeah, man. I hope nobody takes anything I'm saying as like as angry. I'm clear. And I'm not talking about you all. I'm talking about our audience, right? Because sometimes that makes people push back from the table. And I don't want anybody to do that. I want everybody to lean in real close. Because the truth is, man, we got to get here because this is about humanity. This, I cape for Black people all day because I'm Black, and we are legitimately under attack in this country. And so I got to cape for my people because nobody else will. But the truth is, this is about humans. And if they wipe us all out, they already, like, I'm in San Francisco right now. Everybody is poor. Everybody is poor. Like, poverty does not care. All right. And so if we don't get this right for Black people in America, I'm telling you, we are headed to a place that nobody is going to be safe from. And so, like, if you love your family, if you love your child, your mama, your daughter, whoever, help Black people. Give us money, because we know what to do with it.
Yeah, that is true. Well, Edwin, I appreciate you.
Hashtag give us money.
Give us money. That's it. How can you help us? Give us money. We don't need an anthem. How much money are you going to make on the ads with that anthem play? Give that money to Black people. We don't need, how much money you make from, how much more money did you make from putting that Black Lives Matter sign up in your window? Give it to Black people. Like, we need money.
Well said, sir.
Well, Ray, it's good seeing your face. I know it's been since August, September of last
Yeah,
year.
man. Yeah, since Proctor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. You were up here for Proctor Conference.
Yep, yep.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your candor, and I appreciate your friendship, and all the work that you're doing. Please give my love and prayers to the members of the Black Clergy, and
Will do.
know that I'm pulling for you. Any way that we can be of a resource up here in DC, please do let me know. Any way that any of our participants can be engaged in the work that you're doing, send it my way. We'll get it out to the people, and we'll hope to move power in the way of progress.
Absolutely. Yo, and send Christian and Rezolia Johnson a Cash App, because they're taking the time out of their schedule to curate these informational sessions for all of you. So do not be spiritual gluttons, and don't do the sin of Adam and Eve, knowing just to know, but sow into what they're doing, because Black people need money.
Bless you. Bless you for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Love y'all.
All right, now. See you later, everyone.
I love his sense of, we build the narrative not only through the power of what we have done and can do as Black people. I saw a little piece of a TED Talk earlier, and that's what they were saying. They were saying, don't just walk around feeling sorry for us and, apologizing for the pain, but actually, put some funding into the initiatives that we're taking, and also be present if we need you to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because he did have some good points. I mean, he had all his points were good. There is no movement with the way that our current systems are set up, with the way that our political system is set up. We see that the one who has the most entertainment value wins the elections. We see the ones that have the bigger war chest when it comes to campaigns, they win the elections. So that's the same way the policy moves. That's the exact way the policy moves. Those lobbyists, they go into Capitol Hill, they promise all kinds of different things to the elected officials and kickbacks and that kind of thing. Well, I mean,
what happens?
We got to change something. Got to change some systems.
Yeah.
So, wow, I'm wow. So you want to move on to the next person?
Yes. We're going to Reverend Murray.
Yes. I'm inviting Reverend Robin Murray to the conversation. She is with Faith in Texas. She's an organizer with Faith in Texas, a local organization that does really good work as far as immigration advocacy and police reform. And I'll let her explain it more so, because my brain is all over the place right now, especially with the conversation we've had. So welcome, Robin. Tell us about you.
Hello, thank you so much for having me this evening. So I'm a community organizer with Faith in Texas. We're a nonprofit that works on racial, social, and economic justice with individuals and communities here of faith and no faith in DFW. And so we've been on the ground since 2015, working to change systems at the local and state level. We've done things like fought to put caps on interest rates at title and cash loan places, which you often see on almost every other street corner in Black and brown communities. Also ending money bail or cash bail as you know it. We've set up a bailout fund, have done several bailouts for people who should not be sitting in jail because they're poor, which we'll talk about that more. And then of course at the state level, during Texas legislation, we definitely do a lot of fighting in that area, specifically around preemption, which basically it's when the state can come in and tell local elected officials what they should and should not be doing.
So what led you to this advocacy work that we find ourselves in? You and I have talked about it, and we talked about it with some of our colleagues, but how did you get into the mode of justice advocacy from a faith perspective?
Yeah, so when I was in seminary at Perkins here in town, in 2015, God was really working on me. I am an ordained minister in the AME church, And so I've had the opportunity to be around, my pastor is Michael Waters. So God knew exactly what God was doing when God positioned me there. But in 2015, God was just really working on my heart around community organizing. And there was some stuff going on campus at SMU with the undergrads. You and we led a march on campus to fight against racism that we were seeing. That coupled with a class that I was taking, God just opened my eyes and said, "Hey, this is where I need you to be."
Was that the party that you referred to in one of our earlier? Was it a blackface party?
Yeah, it was. It was a party hosted by two of the fraternities on SMU's campus, two of the white fraternities on SMU's campus, to dress up in stereotypes. And Robin was one of the three of us that actually coordinated that march and faithful response and the subsequent meetings with the school administration and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's how I got into it. And so now with Faith in Texas, kind of where my focus is. So similar to what Edwin was talking about, defund, refund, we call it divest, invest. There's billions and billions and billions of dollars pouring into police departments. And we are saying, hey, exactly like he said, take some of that money away from the police departments and start investing in communities. So I work specifically on the investment side with housing. We want to make sure that people, especially our elected officials, recognize the importance of investing in communities, specifically housing, so that we can ensure that people are housing secure. Yeah.
How's that work going so far? Who are you talking to? Where can people undergird your work and in that aspect?
Yeah, so just to talk a little bit about that, since we know that money is going into, first talking about divest, we know that money is going into these police departments, and a lot of people have this idea of what defunding or divesting from the police is. It's not saying take money away from all the police departments overnight all at once. Like that's not going to happen, right? But we do know that that money is going to those billions are going to these departments to protect communities. And most of us have known for a long time that what that protection looks like, especially if you're in a Black community. And we're saying, hey, the investment needs to be in jobs, mental health, and housing. Like put money into that. As far as housing is concerned, many of us know before the coronavirus, people across the country were insecure with their housing. We were in a housing crisis. And, you know, housing costs just completely went up because it turned into a commodity, a way for people to make money, investors to make money. But wages weren't going up. So people literally were horribly experiencing injustice around housing. We're not different. Dallas, we had a boom of revitalization as well. We were considered the fastest growing metroplex for a couple of years in the country. But again, people weren't seeing an increase in wages, and we saw that the development that was taking place was in predominantly Black and brown communities. So our people were suffering. And so we were looking at corporate landlords. That was all before COVID. When COVID hit, it just highlighted all of the inequities that was experienced with housing. We moved in really quick along with some other organizations and demanded that there be a call to put moratorium on evictions and shutoffs. So we were one of the first to help get that done. We also helped to get an ordinance, a rule passed in the city of Dallas that basically says if you're a landlord in the city of Dallas, before you give a person a notice to vacate, if they're a renter, you need to give them a notice of proposed eviction, giving them 60 days, an opportunity to catch up their rent or find some other means to take care of what they need to take care of. And that's still in place right now. And it's for every single person who is impacted. If you're impacted by COVID-19, then you'll get that opportunity, hopefully, to work with your landlord. That's going to be in place as long as Texas has a disaster declaration. And so what we're doing now is at the county level, those judges who see evictions, we're trying to make sure that they ensure that that law is actually implemented. And so we're running campaigns, reaching out to people on the ground to see who is having this concern, if they're worried about eviction right now in this moment, or if they will be. We want them to make sure that they understand their rights, because most people who are entering into eviction don't even show up. And there's a rule that says by default, you're automatically considered wrong. And showing up is the most important thing. Also, there's some other little tips and tricks that people can do. And so we're trying to make sure that people are educated about that. So we have some things that we're doing upcoming for that. And then there's this larger thing about access, right? We want to make sure that people have, if you look at the bigger scheme beyond this, people need access to safe housing. They need access to housing that's affordable. And more than that, like even beyond just renting, Black people, we need access to land. We need ownership. So what does it look like for Black communities to have ownership of housing, and not just ownership, but with equitable loan options if we need to take out a loan?
There's a lot going on just in the realm of housing. I'm grateful for that work that you all are doing as far as the renters are concerned, to make sure that they are protected in this time. Because I have heard of different landlords that have tried to kick residents out of their houses with no notice, and because they have rent due, and those that are requiring rent to be paid in full at the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, as soon as that exemption time lapses. So I'm grateful for that work. Are y'all putting information out into the community as far as one sheets, or how are you getting the information to renters in order for them to understand their rights and whatnot?
Absolutely. So we actually have an event coming up. We're part of a coalition called Communities United for Greater Dallas. And we have a town hall coming up on July the 14th at 6:30. And we're going to have Legal Aid of Northwest Texas, along with a couple of other representatives, one from City Square and one from Labor, because it's a labor organizing coalition. And they're going to be talking about resources, because in the midst of all of this, we're still in the middle of COVID-19. People still need resources. So at that town hall, Legal Aid of Northwest Texas is going to be sharing, and they do have one-pagers, and we've shared some of those. We have information on our website, but they'll be sharing the resources that they have. You could potentially get assistance from them and get an attorney to help you if you need, and then resources for how you get rental assistance, food, things like that. So Faith in TX, faithintx.org. That's our website, and there's two places that you can look at. One says resources and one says get involved.
I was just getting ready to ask you how our viewers can get involved, but there you go. Just go to the website, and there are different options there.
Yeah. And I also wanted to just add that, the advocacy and community organizing, they're two different things, and they're both very much needed. With advocacy, there's a time when we need to make sure that we're advocating for others with our voices, with our bodies, with our vote through civic engagement, right? When people are in the middle of a crisis, sometimes it can be hard to ask them to consistently advocate for themselves, because they're just trying to make it. So we need people at times to be able to do that. For Faith in Texas, we see that and we understand that. We've done that. We also organize. Organizing is strategically building people power in a way that informs, educates, and empowers them to be able to change systems and structures that continually oppress people, that harm God's people. And so this looks like things like that ordinance that we got passed in the city of Dallas, new laws. It looks like putting people in office that care about people over just politics. And so I bring that up because the education piece is really important for us. So we have events, and the education is just one step, right? You first educate and then you act, right? And so we have an event coming up. It's a political education event, and it's imagining safety, race policing, and incarceration, because we work a lot in that area. And so that's a good opportunity for people to connect as well. That's going to be this Saturday at 2 p.m. And again, if you go to our website, there'll be a link that you can sign up and register.
Okay. All right. Well, after we move on to the next visitor, after we move on to the final advocate that I want to bring on, can you put that information in the chat room, and I'll slide it over to the Facebook chat, and we'll go forward from there?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Cool deal. Yeah, because the Live Free campaign, how is that going with Brittany White and with the greater Faith in Action Network?
Yeah, so Brittany White is no longer with Faith in Texas. She got promoted and is doing awesome and amazing things with Live Free National. We have 2 new Live Free organizers, and that is Ben Robinson and Tiara Cooper. And they're doing an amazing job. As I said, this divest invest strategy is like a small step into a larger understanding of how we can exist in the world. I think they're doing an amazing job helping people who are directly impacted understand that it's not just what they were told, that you're just a bad person that did a bad thing, that systems were stacked up against you. And so doing that education piece, also bailing them out, also creating a strategy for what does it look like to have folks who are doing this learning process advocate for themselves, go to the Capitol when it comes time for Texas Leg session in 2021. And so these are the things that we're doing now.
It's amazing to see colleagues, doing that thing and working for the kingdom, working for the building of the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Because it takes some radical spirits. It takes some really resolved persons to be engaged in this work and to continue to invite others into the work and whatnot. So, Robin, thank you for your tireless faithfulness. And it's funny that Robinson. That he was actually one of my adjunct professors at Perkins. Like he taught a white it was a class on colonialism and Christianity. So I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Rosalia, did you have a last question or anything?
I did not. Thank you so much, Robin. I was just gonna say I love the way you all are intertwining different types of advocacy, the self-advocacy, individual advocacy, organizational, and also systemic. So great job. Thank you so much for all y'all are doing.
Thank you.
Any last comments? Robin, do you have a final plug? Do you have a final plea for the people that are listening to the conversation?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing that I think about a lot as I think about my faith in this moment is being a Black person in America, as Edwin said, for me, I feel constantly attacked. I feel my husband being attacked. And there's just this level of like communal sin that exists in racism and the systems of white supremacy. And I'm constantly wondering, how are we going to be redeemed from this communal sin? And for me, what's really important is human dignity and worth. So often people they think that some people are worth more or less than others. And unfortunately, in the Black community, we're on that less than side. And I think one of the things that I would ask people to do, especially if you're a Christian, is if we really see people in the image of God as we're supposed to, then that means that we need to see their inherent worth and dignity as a person that has been created in the image of God. And so, you know, faith is seeking understanding. And so I think that means understanding ourselves as well. And how are we growing in the process to create this different world, to be freed from this communal sin. So just encouraging the people to constantly be seeking out how we, I'm a part of it too, y'all, how we can grow and really see people in the image of God as they were created.
Gotcha.
Amen.
Well, thank you for being part of our conversation, and I look to see you hopefully sometime soon before Jesus comes back. Hopefully I'll be back in Dallas before then. All right now, bye-bye. Well, Rezolia, we got one last person on the list here. You ready for the final one?
I am.
All right. I'm bringing to the table a gentleman that I just recently came to know that from Texas Impact, a Texas organization that is based in Austin, and they do some amazing work. And once we get his video up, I think he was having some problems with the there we go. Here he is right here.
And here. Switch his background off because I'm not sure about this lighting, but hey, thanks for having me this evening. This has been a great conversation. I think I'm gonna have to work on my lobbying skills to try not to go last next time because I feel like everybody else is taking all the good answers.
Well, we appreciate you for coming on, and I'm pretty sure that you're going to have some new information for us. I saw that you had up before the sanctuary background that you have on right now. You had the GBCS, the General Board of Church and Society front on your as your background.
You like that? I thought you might enjoy that.
Yeah, I did. I was like, wait, are you out front? Do I need to go let you in the building?
I'll put my mask on when you come near.
Well, tell us about yourself and the organization that you're with, Scott.
Sure. So I'm the outreach director for Texas Impact, which was founded in 1973, originally as the legislative arm of the Texas Conference of Churches. And the Texas Conference of Churches no longer exists, but Texas Impact has continued to grow and expand. We now have almost 60 board members representing different mainline Christian, Muslim, and Jewish denominational bodies, including all 5 United Methodist annual conferences in Texas. And so those board members come up with a consensus legislative agenda every other year, leading up to the Texas legislature, which many of your listeners will know meets every other year, the odd numbered years. And so we have an advocacy team that are registered lobbyists that will lobby on behalf of those shared social concerns in the Texas Capitol. And as the outreach director, I work to equip Texans of faith and congregations and religious leaders to be effective advocates, building relationships with their legislators and lobbying and advocating on behalf of the issues that we work on.
All right. Well, so what are some of the initiatives that y'all are gearing up towards since like the Texas legislature doesn't open until next year? But what are y'all working on now?
So 2 things right now that I would highlight. This is the time of year where we would typically be preparing our legislative agenda and getting ready for session, but this is a crazy world that we're living in right now, having to do everything remotely. And so what we are stressing during the interim is the importance of building actual real-life relationships with your legislators and with your district offices. Our theory of the case is that it's important to raise our voices, it's important to protest, it's important to do all of those things, but if we want to make legislative change during the session, we have to have a relationship with our legislator in their office, and we need them to understand that as people of faith, as church leaders, as congregations in their district, that we're an important partner for their work. And so whether we agree with them all the time or whether we disagree with them a lot of the time, it's important right now that we're actually building real relationships. We've had several of our legislative engagement groups and members who have scheduled Zoom meetings with either the legislators or their district offices. And what we're asking for now is to start the conversations that we hope to be able to come back and visit with them about once the session kicks off in January. This month, we're encouraging people to start the conversations about the state budget. There are many who are predicting that there will have to be enormous cuts because of the way the revenue is coming in right now. But we're stressing that that's a choice the legislature will have to make. It's not a foregone conclusion that we have to make cuts to healthcare or public education or any other priority issues. That's a choice they're going to have to make, and we hope that they'll make a choice to do something else, right? So we're wanting to start listening to what they're hearing, what they're thinking, and start to set the groundwork for the conversations we'll have in January. So number one is building relationships. Number two, y'all, right now is about voting, right? And we're a public policy organization, and we're going to equip you to do advocacy work. But right now, especially in a COVID-19 world, we need people of faith thinking about voting. And so we've launched a Texas Faith Votes campaign. You can find that on our website, texasimpact.org. It's right there on the front page. And there are 3 key components to that campaign. Number one, we're encouraging people to pledge to vote. We have a Pledge to Vote campaign that we can link or you can find there. But we're asking Texans of faith to pledge to vote based on 4 priorities: health infrastructure, immigration reform, climate, and non-discrimination. And we're trying to create a list of thousands and thousands of Texans who will make that pledge. So as the elections come near, we can tell candidates for office that X number of people in your district, X number of people statewide have taken this pledge and will vote, that they prioritize these issues and they'll vote. And then we'll have volunteers follow up to make sure that those people actually show up on election day. So we're asking people to make the pledge to vote, but also in a COVID-19 world, we need to make sure that people are voting safely. And so we're encouraging congregations to recruit congregational vote by mail captains. We have some of your members who might be listening who have taken on this pledge, but we're looking for congregations to think of creative ways to encourage people to vote by mail. And so I know one of your active members, their congregation is still meeting online, and the seniors in the church, they're sending a DVD every Sunday so they can watch it at home, and they're putting a vote by mail application in that box to make sure that those folks are applying to vote by mail. Other congregations are calling everybody over the age of 65 to ask them if they need to hand deliver one of those applications to their home, right? And so some folks over 65 would say, well, I like to go vote on election day. Well, that's cool, but we might be in the middle of a pandemic. So whether or not you feel like it's safe for you to vote, we want to make sure the lines are short. We've seen in some of these primary voting states that they've had to get rid of voting locations, and some because poll workers don't feel safe. So if we can get as many people over 65 as possible, or 65 and older, to vote by mail, it'll make election day safer for everybody and help try to make shorter lines if the pandemic is still rolling in November. And finally, I just mentioned that, you know, we've seen in other states that some folks call in sick or choose not to go work the polls on election day because they're 65 plus and don't feel like they should be working in the middle of a pandemic in front of all those people. So we want congregations to be recruiting poll workers who are younger and healthy to volunteer to work the polls, to take the place this year of those typically older folks, retired folks who take on that role. So visit your legislators, participate in Texas Faith Votes, vote, vote, vote. Probably a much longer question than you were looking there.
That was perfect. That was perfect. I mean, because it gave people a rundown of the activities, of the initiatives that y'all are working on, and also it called them into the work, called them into what you all are advocating for. And I've had so many questions about what's going to happen with voting procedures, what's going to happen, or how can we become active with voting to assure that we can do it safely and, if possible, by mail, outside of, you know, the Texas Supreme Court denying or refusing to listen to that case, and the Supreme Court up here in DC has done the same. So we've got to do something. So you all have come up with some creative initiatives in order to assure that we can move forward with our elections through November, because the alternative is not preferable. So we have a question on the books. Let's see, the 4 items. Oh, so how does Texas Impact come up with their priorities? How do you all develop your strategies?
So every other year, we have a board retreat where all 50 or 60 board members get together for a couple days and look at priority issues that we can all agree on. And so you can find our list of priority issues on our website, again, texasimpact.org. And the goal is that we find issues that all of our different denominational bodies can agree on. And so number 1 is what can we agree on? And number 2 is what do we think will actually be issues that are hot or are moving this legislative session, right? And so I see the question in the chat was, how did these particular 4 make the voting list? Again, those are health, climate, immigration, and non-discrimination. We came up with those earlier this year, like in January or something like that, because we anticipated that those would be 4 hot issues both through the election season and into the next legislative session. Our board will start working in September to set that agenda for the next session. So if you have thoughts on that, I'd love to visit with you about it. My email address is scott@texasimpact.org. But the board will take a look at those in the September board retreat. And because we have a lot of United Methodists listening or watching, you can rest assured that it will look very close to the United Methodist social principles. All right, we have the United Methodist Women's Legislative event is one of the biggest events we do every year, typically a 3-day in-person conference during legislative session. We have a lot of United Methodists on our board, but they're going to have some hard conversations trying to figure out what a legislative agenda and what those priorities look like, especially now with everything going on. And so we have started conversations, and I'll just say as a white guy from Texas, I have to do a much better job of listening to my Black colleagues and clergy friends about what that agenda will look like in this world. We've been doing a weekly witness podcast series, which I host over the course of the last few weeks, where we've been scheduling clergy of different races from the same community to have a conversation about this world we're living in and what the response to systemic racism might look like. And a good friend of mine, Linda Davis, from the Houston area, Boynton Chapel United Methodist Church, said something that stuck with me. She talked about the police measure that the Senate was taking up, and I guess it started with, "We hear you." And her response was, "Do you really hear me? Are you listening to what I'm saying, and what are you going to do about it?" And I think as the board moves into that discernment process about what the legislative session is going to look like, we need to do a better job of listening and also looking at all of the public policies that we address through the lens of racial justice. Christian connected me with Christian Brooks, one of our Presbyterian church colleagues, for a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about this idea of looking through every piece of public policy through a racial justice lens. And so I've been asking the Black clergy who've been joining us for the podcast, what would you start with? Right? And it's amazing that I've now asked 4 or 5 people and they all have a different answer, right? Everybody talks about policing, but some have talked about public education, and some have talked about housing, and some have talked about Medicaid expansion. And so I think the answer is all of them, right? But those are conversations we're starting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Again, you can reach out to me by email, and I'd love to visit with you about that.
How do you all choose your board?
So we don't choose our board. The denominational bodies send them to us, right? So the bishop equivalent in United Methodist world, the bishops would send us the board members. And so if folks are interested in that, I guess you can start lobbying your bishop for when one of those slots comes up again.
How often do they come up? Is there a term limit, or they just?
There hasn't been. That's again the discretion of the judicatory leader.
Okay.
And so if folks are interested in that, shoot me an email too. We can have that conversation as well, off video.
Scott, you have pretty much hit every question that I was going to pose to you out of the out of the park. And Rezolia too, we were just chatting amongst ourselves, was saying, look, I mean, you've pretty much hit it on point. So what
Christian? Here. No need to kiss up today.
Well, I mean, hey, I guess great minds think alike, I guess, I don't know. But like, for the most part, how has your experience being an ally in this moment been affected by the need of others to be anti-racist? Does that make sense?
Say a little more. What are you looking for?
How you do justice work? You've been doing this for a while, and we consider you an ally. At least I do. I consider you an ally in the struggle towards racial equity, and anti-justice work. Anti-racism work. How do you see yourself, or how do you see the expansion of anti-racism work from an ally's perspective?
Yeah, it's been, I'm just gonna be honest, man. It's been hard over the last couple of weeks because I think white allies, I would like to think of myself as having my stuff together on this, right? But I got on the podcast last week corrected by Danielle Ayers from Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, because I think I phrased the question as in regards to people of color, and she came back and said, "Hey, this isn't about people of color. We got to talk about Black people right now." And so I've been trying to find opportunities to have those uncomfortable conversations and ask how I and how we can do better. And for a lot of us, I think, because we're advocating for Medicaid expansion and public education and all of these things, that we think we have all of the answers and we think we're there, but we need to recognize that we all, white folks, still have work to do on this. And so I'd encourage the white folks listening to take some opportunities, just be vulnerable and have some conversations off air with some friends. And read all the great resources out there, but recognize that we are all falling short on this. And so we all have some personal responsibility to take, but we also need to do a better job of looking at public policy through a racial justice lens. It's not just about expanding Medicaid in Texas, but about doing that work. I'm looking at the questions online, sorry.
Yeah,
yeah, she is still on the board.
Darlene still is on the board, yeah. Yeah, she's a member of our Advocacy for Justice group as well. So yeah, Darlene is very active. But Scott, thank you very much for your candor and for your and for your organization's work in connecting people of faith to advocacy in Austin.
Thank you all, and thanks for these important conversations and for the time tonight. I really appreciate the work General Board of Church. As a United Methodist, I really appreciate the work of General Board of Church and Society and all of you who are listening tonight. So thanks for taking the time.
Most definitely. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.
Well, Rezolia?
This is, was someone asking us to contact Darlene Alfred, I mean?
No, they were saying. I think she was just mentioning that Darlene was a member of the board.
Yes. Oh, okay.
So
we are very familiar with her.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think we've had another successful conversation on what it means to be faithfully active in this era.
Absolutely, and lots of great resources that we have to put out there, including the one that you started with. We're going to include that in the resource packet, so that if you missed that, and Christian kind of went through it kind of quickly, and then we have these other esteemed panelists who have also provided a lot of resources. Very, 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 very good.
Yeah, it's been
fruitful.
It's been a fruitful conversation, and people are still asking. I still get emails asking about the different resources and connecting them to different persons with the General Commission on Religion and Race, and with other anti-racism organizations that are just active in trying to unravel the mess that we find ourselves in today. Well, if all If all hearts and minds are clear.
Well, don't forget next Monday.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Another one.
Go ahead.
So next Monday, we are going to hear from Pastor Fred Bates of Grace United Methodist Church in Arlington, Texas, and he's going to be covering the law enforcement side of faith in action. So there were several questions in our first webinar about law enforcement. There are some things, a lot has changed. I know that Arlington Police Department is putting some things in place as far as policy goes and changing some of the choke policies. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are several other cities around mm-hmm. the nation so a lot has changed since that first time, Christian. I think, I don't think, and you can correct me, but I don't think there has been a time when particular local areas begin actually changing their policies that quickly.
I draw blanks. I mean, because even like the civil rights movement, the bus boycott, that lasted for the entire year before any possible change was made in Montgomery and whatnot. So, and even when the Watts riots and the riots after Rodney King, I mean, we're still dealing with police brutality. So not much has changed since then. So yeah, this is a pivotal moment that we're in. This is I still feel the wind of Pentecost.
Yes. Hey, you know what I say? It's not a moment. It's a movement.
Right. I'm glad to be able to have this conversation with you. I'm glad to be a partner in the movement with you. So thank you.
Christian.
Well, is that the only announcement that you have?
That was it.
That was it.
Next week at 6:00. Join us.
All right. We'll send out the invitation as usual, as well as the links to the conversation posted online. It's available on Rezolia's YouTube channel, as well as with the General Board of Church and Society. So until next time, I guess, we'll see you. You get active, get educated.
Pray us out.
Okay. Well, but in the meantime, just get active, get educated, and find a way to participate in your local as well as federal areas. Let us pray. Gracious and good God, we give you thanks and praise for another day not promised. We give you thanks and praise for our struggles and successes, for with all of them, through you, they will be perfected in the end. All that we ask is that you keep showing up in our lives, keep reaching out to us, keep loving on us as we try to fix ourselves and love our neighbors better than we love ourselves. Lord, keep moving in mighty ways to reveal your power and your love in community. Heal the hearts and minds of those who resist your change, and keep us lifted up as we lift up each other. Yeah. Please touch every family that is represented on this webinar and everyone that comes under the sound of our voices. Holy Spirit, have your way. And we will continue to give you all the praise and glory. These things we ask both now and forevermore. Amen.
Amen. Amen. To God be the glory.
Amen.
God be the glory.
Bye-bye, y'all.